Alright, so the past 24 hours have been pretty crazy when it comes to Helldivers 2, and it all started with yesterday's patch that Arrowhead Studios released to the game. And before I start talking about this, I just want to mention that yes, I've been playing a lot of Helldivers 2 since the patch dropped, and I do have a couple of things to say about it, but I also want to bring up not only the absolute chaos that the community has been in, but also an actual dev response that we're going to be looking at as well. First off, if we check in on the Helldivers subreddit, you can see here that it's absolutely crazy right now, and I have not seen a subreddit being this absolutely chaotic in a long time. Now, just to give a small breakdown of what's happened here is that the patch that Arrowhead released yesterday both nerfed and buffed several items in Helldivers 2, one of these being the railgun, which is one of the most used stratagems in the game, and it's definitely the strongest stratagem considering it had essentially really no drawbacks for using it. It could essentially kill basically every enemy in the game without too much effort. And so what Arrowhead did is that they decreased the armor penetration for the safe mode, but it also seems like the gun is less effective overall after using it myself with the unsafe mode, and harder enemies are definitely more difficult to kill now than they were before. At least Terminids are, as I've noticed that you can still kill enemies like the Hulks with one shot to the red eye here. Another item that got a nerf was the breaker shotgun, which is just overall less effective because it has a lower ammo count. And then we had the personal shield, which has a longer delay time after it breaks. Now, going back to Reddit here, I just want to show off some of the threads that are some of the more popular ones right now. And here we have a thread by Surge who says, "Can a dev tell me what stratagem I should have brought for this situation?" Now, obviously, this person is playing on the 9th difficulty, presumably, that being the Helldiver difficulty, where just tons of Bile Titans and stronger enemies just start flooding your team throughout the entire match. Obviously, this happens because this is the most difficult mission type, but usually when you play the Helldiver difficulty, you were always able to sort of rely on the railgun plus shield combo to essentially deal with the Bile Titans relatively effectively. But now it seems like the Helldiver difficulty has become sort of unplayable for a lot of people. Now, I just want to profess that I never play Helldiver difficulty because I just think, even before the patch dropped, that it was just a frustrating difficulty and I want to have fun when playing the game and I don't want to smash my head into my keyboard just because I get frustrated. But here we have another thread by Kuruneko Best Girl. What are we supposed to do with 5 Bile Titans and 7 Chargers spawning all at once on a tiny Eradicate mission? How is this balanced in any way? And you know, I can see what this person is trying to say here, and I definitely get it. I've seen a lot of threads like these, and they're usually pretty popular, so it definitely seems like the community is pretty much split 50-50 here when it comes to the update. However, there are other ways to deal with the Bile Titans. For example, you can use other anti-tank weapons. That said, I do feel like most of the anti-tank weapons need a slight buff, because for now, they just don't feel that viable. But as I mentioned, the railgun was not the only thing that was changed, but we also had the armor values actually being adjusted or fixed. So now heavy armor actually works, and I can confirm that it does because I've been playing with heavy armor most of the time. And so we get this little meme by Illasro saying, "Calling this a fix is too generous." And here we have a beautiful piece of art showing us what Illasro means here, where it says how armors felt before the fix: light armor, naked and fast; heavy armor, naked and slow. How armors feel after the fix: light armor, still naked, still fast; heavy armor, armored with a sheet of paper that has armor written on it, still slow. I don't completely agree with this as much as I love this art piece right here. The heavy armor is definitely much more effective now. You can take around like 10 hits before you go down from smaller enemies. But yeah, you'll die pretty much immediately if you get overrun by enemies. So yeah, it doesn't really necessarily help much. What I've noticed that if you still use the shield backpack, and if you combine this with the B08 light gunner armor, you can actually get some speed and stamina regen, plus normal armor rating. So you can increase your survivability by using this armor set, so I think it kind of acts like a crutch for now for a lot of you guys who feel like the light armors might be too squishy now. However, this was the purpose all along. The light armors aren't really supposed to protect you much, they're just supposed to make you run quicker and regenerate your stamina quicker. So, I mean, it is fixed, and the heavy armor does work as intended. I do think that the heavy armor could be a bit stronger though, and I do think that the helmets should in some case protect your character, but unfortunately there is no armor value for the helmet, so if you get like hit in the head or shot in the head, you're obviously 9 times out of 10 you're gonna be one shot. But yeah, just a little tip, if you want to have some degree of survivability with the light armors, then if you have the light gunner, use that instead and buy it with some super credits on the next rotation when it's in the store, because I don't think it is right now. So on the 6th of March, there was an article published on Arrowhead's website where we get some words from Patrick Lasota, who is the designer for the first Helldivers, and let's check out what he has to say. Hello everyone, my name is Patrick Lasota. I was the designer on the first Helldivers and I'm currently head of product testing at Arrowhead. A bit of a grandiose title, but what it means in this context is that I'm responsible for how Arrowhead listens to feedback and balances its games. I'd like to talk about the changes we made in this patch and why. First part says here, primary weapons. First, I'd like to speak to the general power of primary weapons. Many have commented that they aren't powerful enough and are unable to deal with all the enemies either by the amount of ammunition required or their raw DPS. This is very much intentional. You need to rely on your stratagems and the stratagems of your team to deal with all the enemies effectively. Either by Eagle airstrikes, orbitals, support weapons, or turrets, some of your loadout/team should be tailoring their loadout to killing the weaker stuff more efficiently. This doesn't mean that your primary weapon shouldn't feel good to use, but please understand that it is only primary in the sense that it's something you always spawn with. Then we get to the next part, which says nerfs and fantasy. I have since the game release seen many who say don't nerf, only buff, and other similar ideas. However, as a designer, I can tell you that this is not a great idea, but I understand where the sentiment comes from. All too often in the games industry, the core fantasy and what makes a weapon feel good and fun is ignored for the sake of balance. I believe players are scared of nerfs because it will ruin the fantasy of a weapon, ruin their fun. It is extra important to us to tread carefully so that we don't ruin fantasy and fun when we do nerfs. We hope you, our players, will tell us when we cross that line inadvertently. And I think people have been telling them that Arrowhead sort of crossed that line. Now I see what Patrick is saying here, and I understand that buffing weapons and items constantly has the chance of ruining the fantasy feel of the game by making it too easy. There is a real risk of getting power creep, massive power creep, that is, when you update and buff things way too much. That said, the problem with things like the railgun, for example, have always been not that people necessarily want to use the railgun, at least that's how I feel. It's more along the lines that none of the other weapons are effective enough to kill bigger enemies. And so I've always felt that if any of the other like anti-tank weapons, for example, were a little bit buffed, then I would probably use them over the railgun, because I wouldn't say that I exactly love using the railgun, because I guess I'm just a little bit burnt out by using it. And I also want to clarify that that's essentially what this whole meta discussion boils down to, is a meta loadout or meta weapons will always exist because people are going to choose the path of least resistance, and that will always be the case. So they choose the best loadouts and the best weapons. And so after this patch, there are going to be new metas, and I think that we're going to have a flamethrower meta now because the flamethrower is much stronger than it was before. However, I feel like basically every weapon needs a slight buff here, at least when it comes to stratagem and support weapons. Now, Patrick goes on to talk about the Breaker also, for example, the Breaker shotgun. And here he says the Breaker was quickly pinned down as the meta weapon, vastly overperforming other weapons and being the best choice for all Helldivers, at least if YouTube is to be believed. But I mean, it was. Let's not kid ourselves. It definitely was the best weapon. And you can't really blame YouTubers for talking about this and just covering the things that are statistically better. Now, I don't think he does, but I've seen people talk about this, blaming YouTubers for talking about how some things are meta and some things are not. It doesn't matter if it's a YouTuber or if it's a blogger or whatever it is. Somebody will find out what the best weapon is and they're going to talk about it and people are going to start using that instead. So like, don't start blaming other people for finding these things. Again, I'm not saying that Patrick is doing this, but I've seen people who do, so stop that shit. Anyway, Helldivers veterans will remember the breaker from the first game and how powerful it was, something we made an effort to mimic in this game as well. When we looked at the breaker and the data we have on its usage, it painted a picture of a well-liked weapon that was great at killing chaff and generally had a few more kills than other weapons. It was, however, not necessarily better at making you succeed in a mission, and no real damage nerfs were warranted. The calculated total damage per magazine was quite high compared to other weapons, however, and something that could be reined in while reinforcing the intended fantasy. The fantasy of the breaker is a powerful automatic shotgun that bucks wildly as you hose down targets in front of you. It should be deadly up close with high DPS, and its major drawback should be ammunition management and pacing your fire so as not to overshoot a target. To that end, we have lowered the amount of shells in each magazine and increased the recoil. Still though, the breaker is still pretty usable, so I wouldn't say that they've completely killed this weapon, and they really haven't with any of these nerfs. It's just they killed the current meta, and now we have a new one. Now we also see Patrick talking about the Punisher, the Breaker Spray and Pray, but the real important ones here are the Railgun and Flamethrower. Okay, so here's what Patrick says about the Railgun. Another one of the current meta weapons enforced by its convenience and efficiency. The Railgun is really intended to be a high-powered anti-tank sniper rifle requiring both timing and the unsafe fire mode and accuracy with where you hit the enemy. It was vastly overperforming in how safe it was to use and how convenient it was, not requiring a backpack or assistance to be effective and not requiring risk to take out even larger armored targets. To that end, we have changed it so that the safe mode is capable of penetrating medium armor such as automaton scout walkers, but not more heavily armored targets like chargers and bile titans. For those targets, you must now run it in unsafe mode and overcharge it. In addition, we reined in the railgun's ability to damage massive body parts, meaning to get any real efficiency out of it, you must score hits on heads and other weak points. We are aware it rose to prominence as part of an anti-tank weapons not being as convenient or efficient in comparison. We are monitoring the situation closely and will adjust more based on how this change plays out. Again, this is actually really good news because it seems like they're looking at the possibility of maybe buffing some anti-tank weapons. As I've said before, and as I said ever since the game was released and I started making videos on it, the anti-tank weapons needed a buff, and we're probably going to get some buffs to them because people want to use the other anti-tank weapons because they're fun to use, but they're not necessarily as effective. And yes, as I mentioned before, the railgun definitely feels weaker. You really have to overcharge it right before it blows up in your face in order to effectively kill chargers now. And I've noticed that not even 2 or 3 shots are enough to shoot the armor off the legs anymore, and you usually just needed 2 of those. So yeah, it's definitely not as effective anymore. Then he mentions the flamethrower. The flamethrower is really the embodiment of stepping into a queen's lair and torching all her eggs as done by a badass action heroine. That being Ripley, of course, it should be powerful up close and an inconvenience to enemies that are lit on fire or want to walk through the fire and flames. As many have commented, the flamer has felt a little too anemic, not outputting damage at a rate that is warranted by a weapon with a shorter range and large volatility, such as the flamethrower. We have increased the flamethrower's direct damage to be able to barbecue enemies that get too close much faster. Please enjoy your terminate barbecue device responsibly, as this also makes it even more volatile for any Helldivers caught in this stream. That's true, you can still get burnt by your own flamethrower, you can still burn your squad mates very quickly, so be careful when using this thing, but it's definitely one of the stronger weapons now. Thank God. Also, the laser cannon, of course, got a buff as well, but it still doesn't seem like it's strong enough to deal with a lot of bigger enemies. Here, for example, Patrick says the laser cannon has gained additional damage versus massive body parts, increased armor penetration to make it capable of dealing with medium armor, and better ergonomics to make it easier to stay on target. So it doesn't seem like this is supposed to be something that actually penetrates heavy armor. I have seen some videos from people who are trying to shoot at the legs of the chargers, but it's not penetrating, of course, because it's heavy armor. However, in one clip especially, someone managed to kill a charger that was charging by using the laser cannon, but it only penetrated after or during the charge of the charger, which seems to be a bug right now because, yeah, it doesn't look like it should work. Then he also talked about the shield backpack, where he says the shield backpack is safety at the expense of a backpack slot. Unfortunately, the safety offered up by the shield backpack was a bit too great, essentially allowing you to ignore many mechanics that contribute to the fun of Helldivers, such as knockbacks, shockwaves, and giant explosions obliterating you and your friends. To that end, we have increased the time the shield needs before it starts regenerating, if not broken, quite significantly. This essentially means that you can't hide behind a rock for 5 seconds to get your shield back to full. Instead, it will be a degrading health bar until it breaks. When the shield breaks, it will take longer to regenerate than before, but still significantly shorter than if it has not broken. To compensate for those extra times, the regen speed of the shield itself is near instant max HP. This is only a partial solve in our minds for the shield backpack, but it should bring it out from the must-have meta slot it has filled currently. Now, if you want to read the entire blog post, I've added it to the comment section below in the pinned comment there. But I just want to end off by saying that if you have criticism, make sure you're being respectful. If you don't like this change, then let them know, but be respectful about it. Don't go ahead calling people names and, acting like a privileged kid. Like, it's just a video game, guys. And they're trying to make it as fun as possible for everyone, okay? So being critical is fine. Just be nice about it. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like what you see in here, then remember to like as well and subscribe to MrHulthen. Signing out.